Well-written learning objectives are the essential foundation for any learning experience design. Once you have good learning objectives, then you are free to start building out the content, the practice, assessment, to move on with the rest of your design. But you have to start with really good objectives. So let's talk about how to spot good learning objectives and how to write good learning objectives. So learning objectives, also known as instructional objectives, depending on who you're talking to, usually consist of three parts: an audience, a behavior, a verb, and a condition. Sometimes there's a fourth part, a degree. You may wish to have your learners be 80% proficient or 60% proficient, and that can be maybe part of a bigger assessment project. But generally, there's 2 or 3 parts of a learning objective. The condition isn't always included, but there's always has to be an audience and a behavior. So let's take a look at what this looks like. An objective needs to be specific, measurable, observable. This is not something that's just happening in your learner's head. It's something that you have to be able to observe. When you write learning objectives, avoid what are called double-barreled objectives. Address one behavior at a time. That means any learning objective should only have one verb in it. If you have 2 verbs in it, write another objective. You should have 2 objectives, okay? Only one verb per learning objective. You can have all the learning objectives you want, but it makes it easier to measure and to design around if you only have a very simple learning objective. All right, examples. Here's a learning objective. Describe the history of American immigration policy. Given a template, that's the condition. So given a template, create a marketing plan for your organization. So that could be something for like a business class where students are expected to create a marketing plan, but they're not going to do it from scratch. They're going to be given a template, and that's a fair tool to be able to use to support accomplishing a learning objective. Given a list of chemical compounds, that's another condition. The student will select one that's found at each step in the process of respiration. So this is kind of a description of a task that they're going to do. They're going to be given a list of chemical compounds. The implication here is that some of them will be used in the process of respiration, some of them won't. But given that list, they're going to look and figure out which are and which are not. So they don't necessarily have to come up with this information from scratch. The information will be there. They'll just have to figure out which chemical compounds are part of the process of respiration, okay? So these are all well-written learning objectives. And notice that each one has a single verb: describe, create, select, okay? These are all specific and measurable behaviors, okay? These verbs correspond to a behavior. We can tell if the learners have mastered these objectives because they will be performing this behavior with a condition or without. All right. So you'll see a lot of learning objectives out there that are actually unmeasurable. This objective is unmeasurable. We cannot observe whether a student understands. The head is kind of a black box in some ways. We can only observe what students can do, and by observing what they're doing, then we can measure their understanding. So understand alone, not measurable. But we can make this measurable. Same for these verbs: know, learn, comprehend. These are all fuzzy verbs. We don't know if students know something, learn something, or comprehend something. They need to show us that they know, show us that they know, show us that they comprehend, okay? So better objective, rewriting this one above, students will demonstrate locating a book using the library catalog. So a little bit longer, a little bit more specific. They're going to show us their understanding, okay? We can observe a demonstration, and if they can demonstrate it, we can feel confident that they understand the process, okay? So we can finally get it back around to that word understand here, but they need to be doing something, a very specific, observable behavior. And by this behavior, we can see that they understand what we want them to understand. Let's look at one more. Unmeasurable. Learn how the elements are arranged in the periodic table. Can't observe learn. Again, we need an observable behavior. Here we go, even more specific here. Explain how the elements are arranged in the modern periodic table, because there are different periodic tables as well. Again, we can observe and measure an explanation. We could have a rubric, we could have a few sentences written out that we can compare and answer against. If they're able to explain this, we can see that they learned it, and we can all be happy. So, let's practice writing a learning objective. There is this wonderful taxonomy called Bloom's Revised Taxonomy. And this guy Bloom basically sorted out the various levels of learning and knowledge into 6 levels here. The most basic level is at the bottom of the period, remember, and then it goes all the way up to create. So the idea is that this is the kind of simplest area to do things related to learning, and it gets more complex as you go up. So you have to remember before you understand before you apply, so on. And the very peak of demonstrating your incredible understanding and mastery of a topic is producing a new or original work. When it comes to online learning, particularly asynchronous, actually not particularly, specifically asynchronous online learning like you might build with Articulate Storyline or Adobe Captivate, these are the levels that it's easiest to build out in an online learning, okay? And I would say that if you are building out an asynchronous online learning, if you're not going to actually be there live measuring student work, assessing student work, asynchronously, this is kind of the best you're going to do as far as automated online learning. And using Bloom's taxonomy and looking at those remembering and understanding levels, we can get some really nice verbs to build out some learning objectives. You can go online, you can actually Google Bloom's Revised Taxonomy of Verbs, and there are many, many, many PDFs and lists out there full of verbs for you to be inspired by as you write your own learning objectives. You might notice that some levels will actually contain the same verb. You'll see the same verb in multiple levels. Like say identify is in understanding, it's also in remembering, and that just kind of depends on the context of how you're using the verb. So just consider that as you're seeing those multiple verbs out there. It's how you use it that really helps it belong to one level versus another. So these are remembering and understanding. These are the basic 2 levels, the bottom 2 levels of Bloom's taxonomy. You can see from these verbs, too, that the activities students would be doing or learners would be doing are very basic. For example, they might need to define terms. Maybe in the next level, they're going to describe why these terms are important. So it's kind of like these 2 levels, again, tend to be like foundational levels that you need to kind of understand the basics about a topic, especially if you're brand new to it, before you can move up the pyramid. So let's go ahead and write a learning objective. On the right here, I've got the 2 lists of verbs related to the remembering and understanding levels. And I've got the parts of a learning objective written out on the screen. So let's pick an audience. I'm going to pick first grade students. You could just say students, you could just say learners, but it's good practice as you're learning to write learning objectives to be really specific about who your audience is. Let's choose a behavior, which again is one of the verbs from the right here. We're going to say they're going to name the 7 continents, okay? So you list the verb and exactly what it is that they need to do with the verb, okay? You can choose a condition. I am going to choose a condition for this one. You don't always have to, but I'm going to say I'm going to give the first grade students a world map to be able to perform this task. So there's not always a condition. I think it's fair for first graders to be given a world map to be able to name the 7 continents. And this is where it comes to knowing your learners. You did a thorough learner analysis before you got to this point, hopefully. So you know what they're capable of and what they might need to support their learning. So let's put it all together. Given a world map, first grade students will be able to name the 7 continents, okay? So got the condition at the start there. First grade students will be able to name the 7 continents. That's our completed learning objective. Now, we need to talk about assessment. How would you actually assess this behavior? So it's specific, it's measurable. I know because I had a very clear verb in there, a very clear behavior, and exactly how I'm going to support them in this learning activity. So when it comes to assessing at these two levels, in particular, remembering and understanding, again, thinking that this is probably going to be an asynchronous online learning experience that they might be completing on their own. These are some ways that you'd be able to assess at this level. Multiple choice questions, true-false questions, short answers, fill in the blanks, matching. These are all things that you could achieve, again, using something like Storyline or Adobe Captivate or some sort of online learning tool where students are kind of working through this on their own. This could be a practice activity that could be turned into a final assessment, but these are kind of the tools that you would use to be able to measure whether or not students are mastering this learning objective. So, what does this actually look like? What assessment should we use for our particular objective? Now again, remember I'm going to give them a world map, that's a condition. So if I were to build this out online as a learning experience, what I would do is give them the world map, and potentially what I could do is actually add a box overlaid for each continent, all 7 continents, remember, on our world map, and they could either type in a short answer to each one, or there could be like a name bank, a word bank, where they could drag and drop items into each continent to see if they get it right. Either would be a valid assessment for completing this activity. Again, this is like a matching or a short answer activity, and it's a pretty good use of using your online software, building out something with your online tool. And using this assessment, you'd be able to tell if the first graders got it or not. All right, so that's basically it for writing learning objectives. From here, it just takes a good amount of practice to recognize well-written learning objectives, poorly written learning objectives, and to start writing your own. To recap, remember the behavior in a learning objective must be specific and observable. Know, learn, comprehend, those kinds of verbs, they aren't going to cut it because we can't observe learn, but we can observe kind of by the back door if a student learns something or not by what they can actually do. They're demonstrating their understanding, their learning. It's really key here to learning objectives. We can only measure what they can do. Unless you're a mind reader, in which case you have a leg up on all of us, but otherwise we have to be able to observe a behavior. And to help you out, just do a quick Google for Bloom's revised taxonomy of verbs, and you'll get a ton of resources out there to help you write your learning objectives.